Paddington 2, Chapter 18. Paddington and the Great Escape. Later that day, the Browns and Mrs. Bird went to the police station with the evidence Mrs. Brown had gathered. They told the officer on duty all about Phoenix and the costumes in his attic, and explained that they believed him to be the true thief of the pop-up book. The officer took notes while looking extremely sceptical. "I know what you're thinking, officer," said Mr. Brown. "My wife is insane." "Thank you, darling," said Mrs. Brown with a thin smile. "But she was right all along," Mr. Brown persisted. Jonathan chipped in. "Judy's the only person who's been printing the truth," he said, holding up one of his sister's newspapers. Judy blushed. "Jonathan helped me," she said. "But don't tell anyone," Jonathan pleaded. "It's not cool." "All right, that's an amazing story," said the policewoman, holding up her hand to stop them. "But all you've proved is that Felix Boochman keeps his old costumes in his attic room. I need solid proof that he is the thief. Bring me the pop-up book with Phoenix's fingerprints on it, and then we can talk." "But," said Jonathan. "Until then, there's nothing I can do," said the policewoman firmly. "I am sorry," she said, walking away from the Browns. Mrs. Brown looked horrified. "Where's she going?" she said. "What are we going to do now?" Jonathan asked. "I don't know," said Mr. Brown sadly. Mrs. Bird tried to cheer everyone up. "At least we can tell Paddington that we know who did it now," she said. "That should give him hope." And as she said this, the clock struck 3. "Oh no!" they cried, looking at each other. "We've missed visiting hour." While the Browns had been trying to clear Paddington's name, Paddington had been waiting anxiously for his visitors, Knuckles' words still ringing in his ears. "Before you know it, they'll have abandoned you altogether." "The Browns won't forget me," Paddington told himself. He repeated it over and over, but as he sat and waited and watched the other prisoners' visitors come and go, he realised that Knuckles may well have been right. At 3 o'clock, the klaxon sounded to signal the end of visiting. Poor Paddington gave a soft growl of despair. He left the room as all the lights and the visitors' booths went out. He went back to his cell and lay on his bed, looking at the photos of himself with the Browns and Mrs. Bird. He tried to imagine the photo with him no longer in it. As he did so, he shed a single tear, which fell onto the floor of his cell and soaked into the floorboards. Paddington sat staring at the patch where the tear had fallen. It made him think of the first raindrops back in the darkest forest of Peru during the tropical storms. He stared at the watermark and imagined a teardrop producing a single green shoot that grew up and up and up. Soon, in his mind's eyes, his cell had disappeared and he was looking at the Peruvian rainforest that had once been his home. And there was his dear Aunt Lucy, calling his name. If ever he needed her guidance, now was the time. "Aunt Lucy, Aunt Lucy." It was really her. "Paddington!" She drew her nephew towards her in a warm embrace. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I thought you'd be at home." Paddington pulled away from her and looked into her eyes. "I'm afraid I don't have a home any more," he said. "You see, I'm in prison, and even the Browns have forgotten me." Aunt Lucy said nothing. In fact, as Paddington looked at her, she faded from view and the jungle round her disappeared. There was a knocking sound, and Paddington realised another voice was calling him now. It was not his aunt's voice. It brought him back to the stark reality of his cell. "Paddington!" It was Knuckles calling down the pipes again. "Tonight's the night. If you want to clear your name, it's now or never. You in?" Paddington leaned against the pipe. He tried to swallow the lump that formed in his throat. "Yes," he said reluctantly. "I'm in." Later that evening, after the warden had called for lights out, Fibs, Spoon, Knuckles and Paddington each lifted their floorboards of their cells and dropped down into the underfloor passage. They met up and crawled in a line to the end of the prison building. "Down the laundry chute, boys," said Knuckles, taking the lead. The prisoners followed him one by one, whizzing down the chute like a giant slide and landing in a pile of dirty clothes at the bottom. "To the pigeonhole," said Knuckles. "You know what to do." Paddington and the men went to find their own clothes and possessions. Then Paddington, as he was the smallest, was chosen to climb inside the clock tower so he could sneak into the warden's office and take the key to the canteen from where they would make their escape. Luckily, he had always been good at climbing, thanks to spending his cubhood in the trees in darkest Peru. He clambered up through the clockwork and managed to tiptoe to the rack where the warden kept his keys. Then he scurried back to meet the others. Paddington and his friends made a beeline for the canteen, where they took a huge bundle of tablecloths that had been stitched together to form one enormous sheet of fabric. Knuckles shimmied out the skylight above the kitchen, while the other prisoners passed him the tablecloth, a laundry basket, and some canisters of propane gas. Then they all climbed out after Knuckles. A searchlight swept across the roof. The prisoners waited for it to pass by them, then ran over the roof to the shadows at the base of the prison watchtower. "Open the laundry basket," said Knuckles. They opened up the huge tablecloth and fixed it by its edges to the side of the basket. "Light the propane," Knuckles commanded. Phibbs put the canister into the middle of the basket and opened the gas valve while Spoon lit it. A tall orange flame shot up and the tablecloth began to rise. "Hop in," shouted Knuckles. Paddington, Spoon, Phibbs all followed Knuckles' lead and leapt into the basket just as the tablecloth inflated fully. Inside the prison, T-Bone was gazing out of his tiny window cell. He almost fell over in shock at what he saw. "A hot air balloon," he said, shaking his head, as if to get rid of a dream. But he wasn't imagining things. There really was a hot air balloon rising from the prison watchtower. A hot air balloon made from some tablecloths, a laundry basket, and carrying 3 men and a bear. "Well, blow me down," T-Bone said to himself, as he watched the prisoners rise up into the sky. "Good luck, young bear," he said. All 3 men threw their prison caps into the air and whooped with delight as the balloon rose higher and higher. Paddington was quiet, however. He looked out over the city he loved and worried about the choice he had made. "What would Aunt Lucy have to say about me being a fugitive?" he thought anxiously. The balloon floated out over the docklands. By now the prisoners had changed into their own clothing and ditched their prison uniforms. Paddington tried to console himself that at least he felt more comfortable in his old hat and duffel coat, and it was a relief to be reunited with his trusty suitcase. The balloon travelled fast. Soon Knuckles was asking Spoon to take them down. "We're there, boys," he said, looking over the edge. Spoon cut the flame, and the balloon began to drift to the ground. It came to a rest by a derelict factory in the east end of London. As the giant tablecloth deflated, the prisoners climbed out of the basket and ran to the nearby wharf. Using the wall of the warehouse as cover, they crept along until they reached a gate. Knuckles said, "Stop! There she is!" He pointed out through the gate. "Our ticket out of here." Paddington followed the prisoner's gaze. His eyes settled on a seaplane. "What's this?" he asked. "Aren't you taking me back to the Browns' house? Where are you going?" The prisoners looked at one another guiltily. You aren't going to clear my name," Paddington said. "I thought that was the plan." Knuckles looked sheepish. "Sorry, kid," he said, "but the plan has changed." "We're leaving the country," said Spoon. "We thought you'd like to come with us." "But you said—" "You lied to me!" Paddington exclaimed. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Knuckles looked ashamed. "It's not like that," he protested weakly. "We've done you a favour, really. If we told you the truth, you'd never come along. It's better this way," he said. Paddington frowned. "I thought you were my friends," he said. "We are," said Phibbs, looking upset. "We'll find some place nobody knows us and we'll start again," Knuckles assured him. "And we'll make marmalade together." He rubbed his hands. "We'll make a fortune." Paddington shook his head. "But I don't want to leave the country, Knuckles. I want to go and clear my name and go back and live with the Browns. You said you would help me." "I'm sorry, kid," said Knuckles, spreading his huge hands. "I also said I don't do nothing for no one for nothing." Paddington dropped his head. Then, taking one last look at the prisoners, he turned and ran. "Where are you going?" Phibbs called after him. "Paddington!" Spoon shouted, but Paddington had already disappeared from sight.